In the heart of a bustling modern African city, where ancient traditions intertwined with the rhythm of urban life, Kunle sat in a dimly lit living room, his mind a storm of suspicion and betrayal. The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds, each one a reminder of his wife Asha's mysterious absence and the ominous secrets that threatened to unravel their family. Kunle sat in the dimly lit living room staring at the clock on the wall. His fingers drummed impatiently on the arm of the chair. His wife had still not been back home from work, leaving him alone with their twin daughters. Zara and Zara Kiel's mind raced with suspicion for weeks. He had noticed A's odd behavior late nights, hushed phone calls, and a distant demeanor. His trust in her and his wife began to fade. The time is 11 o'clock and she is not yet back. What kind of job keeps someone late? Till this time? She's a married woman, for Christ's sake. Sheck cheating on me, he muttered under his breath. The thought consumed him until he decided to take action. A week earlier, he had plucked a few strands of Zaire and Zara's hair and sent them off for a DNA test. He needed to know the truth when the results arrived. Kale's hands shook as he opened the envelope. The words on the report sent a wave of anger through him. Not a biological match, they're not mine. Kunle whispered, his voice trembling with fury. After everything I've done for her. For them, he clenched the paper in his fist, his mind spiraling into darkness. Ah had betrayed him, and he vowed to make her pay. But he wouldn't start with her. He would start with the twins. It was a quiet night when Clay first entered the twins' room. Zara and Zara were fast asleep, their breaths even and peaceful. Kunle stood by the door for a moment, his face cold. Then he stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. Wake up, he whispered as he tapped both of them. Zaire stirred first, blinking up at him in confusion. Daddy, what's wrong? Shut up and listen. Kunle snapped, his voice low and threatening. If either of you say a word about this, I'll kill you both. Do you hear me? Zaire and Zara exchanged terrified glances, their small bodies trembling. They didn't understand why their father was acting this way, but the menace in his tone silenced them. He pinned them one by one to the bed as he entered them. Dad, please stop. It's painful. They cried with tears in their eyes. Kun's visits became a nightmare. Repeated each night, Ah was always there, and hoping that he would stop coming to abuse them, Zara lay awake. After Clay had left their room, Zaire sat up in bed, tears streaming down her face. She glanced at her sister, who was curled up at the edge of the bed and crying softly. We can't let this keep happening, Zaire whispered. What can we do? Zara replied, her voice trembling. He said he'd kill us. Zirk's jaw tightened. We need to record him. We need proof. Maybe Mom will believe us if we show her. The next day, she searched through her mother's drawer and found an old phone. That night when Clay came into their room, Zaire secretly pressed record, capturing the horrifying sounds of what they went through. In the hands of their father, the twins endured days of torment. Before Zaire finally decided enough was enough. One morning after Kunle had gone to work, she turned to Zara. We're telling Mama today, she said firmly. Zara hesitated, fear written all over her face. What if he finds out? What if he hurts us? We can't stay silent anymore. Zara insisted. When returned from her night shift, she found her daughters. In the living room, Mama awaited her arrival. We need to talk, Zara said, her voice shaking. Frowned and set down her bag. What is it, my babies? You look so serious. Zara suddenly wept, and Zaire grasped her hand tightly. Mama, it's Daddy, Zara started. He's been coming into our room at night. A's heart sank as she listened to her daughters describe the horrors they had faced. Tears flowed down her cheeks as Zaire played the recordings. The muffled cries and Kull's threatening voice were unmistakable. No, this can't be, A exclaimed, whispered, covering her mouth in shock that evening as she waited for Kunle to come home. The moment he walked through the door, she confronted him, her face flushed with anger. Kunle, how could you? She screamed, thrusting the phone with the recordings into his face. Kunle glanced at the screen and then at A. His expression was unreadable. You want to know why I did it? He said, his voice calm but icy. Because they're not mine, A. They aren't yours either, and you know it. How could you, A? How could you? You've been lying to me this whole time. For 12 years, I've been raising another man's children, only to find out a few weeks ago that your kids aren't mine. You used me. Kunle said furiously. How could you? You've been lying to me this whole time. For 12 years, I've been raising another man's children, only to find out a few weeks ago that your kids aren't mine. You used me. Kunle said furiously. Froze, her confusion taking the place of her anger. What are you talking about? Clay pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his briefcase and threw it at her. Read it. Those girls aren't mine. You cheated on me and you freaking know it. Stared at the DNA results, her hands shaking. Kunle, please let me explain. I did it for us. I had no other choice for us. Opened your legs for another man, yet you said it's for us. I did everything just to make you happy. Ada, this is how you repay me. Kunle said angrily. We were going through tough times years back. You lost your job and I just graduated from school. In search of a job, your friend Alex offered to help. He said he would sleep with me before giving me a job at the bank. I had no other choice, so I did it till today. I've lived with the guilt of what I did. Please find a place in your hearts to forgive me. It will never happen again. I promise. Please, pleaded, crying that's not a reason for cheating on me. You are my wife and I trusted you completely, but you betrayed my trust. I'm done with you, and as for Alex, I'll pay that fool a visit tonight. Kunle said as he dropped his bag and left home immediately. That night, Clay drove out to see his friend Alec, who had betrayed him. He brought a pistol with him. Conley parked his car in front of Alex's luxurious house, his heart pounding like a war drum. The pistol in his pocket felt heavy, but Kunle stepped out of the car, adjusted his shirt, and approached the door. Alex opened it, his face brightening with a smile. Kunle, my man, what's up? What brings you here at this time of night? Kunle managed a tight smile. I just needed to talk to you. Alex Manto, man, of course, come in. Alex replied, stepping aside. As Kunle entered the house, he took in his surroundings. Everything about Alex's life exuded wealth, a costly leather couch, a huge TV, and a shelf filled with rare liquors. Alex gestured toward the couch. Have a seat. Let me grab us a drink, he said as he headed to the bar. Kunle sat down, gripping his knees. Moments later, Alex returned with 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Kunle. So what's on your mind? Alex asked, taking a sip. Clay stared at the amber liquid in his glass. You and I, we've been best friends since secondary school, right? Alex smiled and leaned back. Of course. You're like a brother to me. We've been through thick and thin together. Kunle nodded slowly. He set his glass down on the table. Exactly, that's why I trusted you. Why I never thought you'd betray me. Alex froze, his smile fading. Betray you? KLA? What are you talking about? Kunle reached into his pocket and pulled out the P, placing it on the table. The metallic sound echoed through the room, making Alex flinch. What the hell, Conley? Alex stammered, raising his hand slightly. I'm going to ask you one question, Kunle said in a low, menacing voice. And God help you if you lie to me. Alex's eyes darted to the gun and back to Kunle. Is this some kind of joke? What are you talking about? Kunle leaned forward, his hand resting on the gun. Did you sleep with my wife years ago before offering her a job at the bank? Yes or no? Alex's face turned pale. Kunle, listen, yes or no? Kunle roared, slamming his hand on the table. Alex gulped, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, but it's not what you think. Before Alex could finish, Clay pulled the trigger. Alex slumped back in his chair, blood pooling around him. Clay sat there for a moment, breathing heavily, as he set the gun down on the table again after a few minutes. Kunle got to his feet, wiping his face with his hand. He went over to the door and paused to glance back at the mess he'd made. The morning after Kunle killed Alex, he sat in his living room drinking coffee as if nothing had happened. He tried to suppress his guilt, convincing himself that Alex deserved what he got, but his peace was short-lived. At around 10 a.m., there was a loud knock at the door. Who's that? Coley muttered as he stood up from his chair. He opened the door. He found 2 police officers standing there, their expressions serious. Good morning. Are you Mr. Kunle Adami? One of them asked. Yes, Kunle replied. You're under arrest for the murder of Mr. Alex Bottle, the officer said, producing a pair of handcuffs. Kunle froze. What murder? I don't know what you're talking about. We have evidence linking you to the crime. Please come with us, the officer stated firmly. Before Kunle could protest further, the handcuffs clicked around his wrists as his neighbors peered through their windows. Kunle was sitting in the interrogation room with his head in his hands as he was led to the police car at the station. A detective entered and dropped a file on the table. Mr. Adami, we know you were at Alex's house last night. Witnesses saw your car parked outside, and we found your fingerprints on the murder weapon. Do you have anything to say? Conley's mind raced. He muttered under his breath. He deserved it. What did you say? The detective pressed. Clay looked up, his eyes filled with anger. He slept with my wife. He betrayed me. Me, I acted as any man would. The detective sighed. You're confessing to murder, Mr. Adami. This will only worsen your situation. At home, Ah was pacing the living room, while Zaire and Zara sat on the couch, their faces drained of color. Mama, do you think the police will believe us? Zara asked, her voice quaking. They have to, Ah said, brandishing the phone with the recordings. No one will hurt you anymore, not even your father. Hours later, 2 police officers showed up at the house. Ah gave them the phone and provided an explanation. Everything, thank you for stepping up, Mrs. Adami. One officer remarked that this evidence suffices to charge him with another offense. That evening, Clay sat in his prison cell with his head down. A guard came over and unlocked the door. You have a visitor, the guard announced. Clay looked up in surprise as a figure entered the visitation room. What are you doing here? Conley asked coldly. Ah glared at him, her eyes blazing with rage. I wanted to see the face of the man who harmed my daughters. Clay's expression grew darker. They're not even my daughters, Ah retorted. Betrayed me first, that doesn't justify what you did. Ah shouted, they children, Conley. Your hatred for me destroyed their lives. So what now? You're here to gloat? No, Ah said firmly. I'm here to tell you that I'm divorcing you. I've already started the process and you'll never see Zara or Zara again. I don't care. You can keep them to yourself, Clay said about 2 months later. Clay stood trial for the murder of his friend Alex and the repeated sexual assault of his twin daughters. In a packed courtroom, the judge found him guilty of both charges. For the murder of Alex, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. For the abuse of his daughters, he received an additional 300 years. These sentences were to be served consecutively, ensuring that Kunli would spend the rest of his life in prison. His wife, sat quietly in the courtroom, unfazed, as she knew justice had been served for her daughters. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section. What would you have done if you found yourself under comparable circumstances?